As far as beta content goes in Left 4 Dead, if you've been living under a rock, Left 4 Dead has had a very well-known development history, and people were really obsessed with Left 4 Dead's beta. Not me saying that I feel like Left 4 Dead's beta is better than the final game, but it's definitely a different look at what the game state was while they were making it, as most of its game design was darker and the character designs were grungier. We all know this. Valve went in and gave them reworks to their design to Turtle Rock, and as a level designer myself, I think it's a common misconception that Turtle Rock just created a really dull level design, but I actually disagree, as Valve really tended to lean more towards realism and leaning toward grays in their level design and less saturated colors. But Left 4 Dead's beta has pockets of color here and there in a lot of these areas, and you actually get some really unique lighting that I think is in these old builds. And if you focus on No Mercy, as I do in this video, because No Mercy clearly has the most amount of footage that you can compare it to, and you can also see the evolution between what was in the betas and the final version of No Mercy, as there's even mods that try recreating these aspects of it. So shout outs to Fairfield Terror as an example, as this is a really good mod, recreates what No Mercy really was in these old builds. You would really have to overanalyze the footage just for this really old game at this point. And also the footage is incredibly blurry, so again, shout out to them for figuring out how this would have looked in the old days. So I'll be using this footage in the video. If you do want a sequel to this video, I'm not really sure if there can be as much detail as this video really does, because we have the most information about No Mercy, as they showed it the most in a lot of gameplay footage and events at the time. We don't really know as much about Death Toll, Dead Air, Blood Harvest, or any of the other campaigns they were working on. It's a really strange way to look at Valve in this retrospective way, as you can see how they really changed No Mercy a lot from these very early builds. But people are still itching to see what this campaign truly would have been like, as there is quite a bit of changes. And if you see my video on Damn It or the River campaign, you would know that anything is really possible. So let's look at No Mercy Map 1, and we'll go through the changes on each level while comparing it to the final version. So there is just gigs of beta content. Make sure to stay tuned, and also make sure to subscribe as well if you like content like this. You guys are the best, and yes, I'm working on a campaign too. It's almost done. I know, people asking me about it. Paradise of Doom coming soon. Now, as far as Map 1, there's a helicopter that can be seen in the beginning of the intro that has actually got a different animation that's normally seen in the final game, and also there's loads of cut dialogue between the No Mercy chopper pilots and the survivors, but this is more relevant to later on in the campaign. So the level is also mostly the same starting out in the beginning of the apartment complex. You find there's actually quite a bit of detail in certain areas, but if you remember the OG layout, you'll see that there's alleys that lead to the outside of the complex, and you'll make your way to, again, what's similar to the final game, is there's an open roadway. This is one of the main differences though right here, is at the very end of No Mercy Map 1, where you get to the safe room, you don't actually go down the stairs into the subway. You actually have the biggest change, which is the clothing store. That is a completely absent element in the final version. So honestly, dude, this is a huge set piece that is really neat. You can see the really cool clothing models that are not used, or the textures that ended up getting scrapped. And also there's hangers that are thrown around on the ground. It looks like there was some zombie apocalypse shenanigans. And also this is a really detailed area for something that did not make it in the final game. So it's really sad this actually got cut. My theory on why this was not in the final game is it probably made more sense and was simpler on the game's engine to just cut this area, because these hangars are a lot of physics props, and as I said, this is a really detailed area, so maybe going for the more grungier environment they ended up going with makes more sense for the game, as it's probably easier to load. It probably makes more sense stylistically that they would go downstairs into a subway instead of just a clothing store that happened to be connected to a subway. So it wouldn't be a surprise that this affected other areas in No Mercy's beta, as there's some slight reskins to the safe house. As in the final game, this is just a random room you go into. Map 2 now, baby. So on the beginning of Map 2, it's the same layout, but the main difference is that the textures are actually completely different. They ended up going with a yellow and white texture originally that was switched over to white and red. And you can see the different textures for the advertisements that actually look really realistic. It's kind of interesting that none of these made it in the final game, which I think Valve ended up making their own new advertisements near the end of development. And if anything, if you miss a lot of this beta stuff, I actually like these realistic advertisements, as they kind of stick out and they feel like a nice touch to the campaign. They add a little bit more variety. The subway section continues though with the same linear pathways that you'll see in the final game, but you'll notice that the lighting is significantly different for sure. It's a lot more darker and grungier. It actually feels like it's a lot harder to see. And you'll notice how Valve actually lights their environments really unique way, as it's completely different to what's in these early betas. You'll notice that the lighting is significantly different in this area. It's a lot more grungy dingier, it's actually way harder to see. And I think that's a big reason why Valve actually cared about the lighting and improving that aspect of the game, as it's completely different from these early betas. If anything, it's probably the one thing that I think Valve did very well with Left 4 Dead, is using the game's set pieces and building off of them and making them actually feel really realistic. So you'll see when you get to the section of the subway, it's not clear exactly where to go, and that was probably the problem that Valve saw in the early betas. As in the final game, this is lit way better and it looks really realistic. It's good to use lighting in ways to show the survivors where to go. There's some actual areas that are really well detailed, but they're actually not in the final builds. And I think Turtle Rock did a really good job with those aspects. And even some of the more colorful lighting I think Turtle Rock was going for in certain areas, like you'll see in these later maps, which again, yeah, stay tuned. Some of these later maps are actually quite a bit different in some areas. You'll notice that Turtle Rock was kind of going for more of a fantastical kind of vibe in a couple of areas. This is also something Valve brought up in their own developer commentary for the game, is yeah, it's really important when making levels to use lighting to show players where they're going to go. Like you can use the generator room as an example. It is pitch black when you enter this room. You don't even know really how to start the panic event if you don't have the game telling you. So while I think it's a neat detail that it actually turns on the lighting when the panic event starts, and it's a big difference, I still think it would be difficult for most players to know exactly where to go. And I think that's why they changed this in the final game. Another thing is you'll see these reskinned soda machines. And I know I've seen a lot of these in the final game, but I think it would have been nice if maybe some of these variants were actually just reused in the actual game. The final roadway is almost exactly the same. Before you get to the safe room, you'll get an alternate view of the No Mercy chopper pilots, and you'll also get to see some old Left 4 Dead beta cars. Obviously these got cut, but you'll finally make it to the safe room, and it's in the same location as the final game at the back of the store. Now map 3 is definitely where I say you're going to see the most amount of changes, and this is why I think it's important to stay tuned, because there is a lot of alternate routes and things that did not make the final game. This is easily some of the most interesting stuff in the whole video, because this is where it gets real interesting. The level starts with a big change right away. Interesting to see that Valve did probably add this section later on. And you'll remember the gas station section, the set piece that is a part of map 3. It was probably one of the most iconic moments in the entire game. It's technically not even required to be seen, because making the gas station blow up is, yeah, it's really cool. You remember the gas station set piece on map 3? I'm sure if you've played Left 4 Dead even once, you obviously know this spot. It's probably one of the most iconic moments in the game, and it's technically not even required, but making the gas station blow up is really cool, and bonus points if you kill your team. But it doesn't actually start a panic event, even though it is, you know, looks like it would, but hitting a button somehow does. I don't know, whatever. Remember the gas station though, as yeah, you technically don't go inside it. And I know a lot of people are wondering, if you want a little bit of trivia, Valve actually hit up a studio to actually create this element of the gas station exploding and making it look really cinematic. This really does add to the level, because I mean, just look at this, just look at how cool it is. Just imagine it not being in the game. And obviously in these early builds, it actually was not in there. So this is actually one of the interesting things, is you still get to blow up the gas station. Originally the area was actually completely boarded up in the final game, and they obviously ended up choosing the kitchen instead of the gas station for this exact area. In these early betas, you actually could go inside the gas station, which is a really interesting thing that did not make the final games. So it looks like they obviously cut the area and they made a big change on making the survivors go through the kitchen instead of the gas station. This is obviously one of the biggest things that people complain about of this early beta of No Mercy, is they really miss this area. And if you make your way to the panic event, you'll also see there's a different layout of this event, through the ladder to a fire escape and then break the window. So you can go through there and run on the rooftops just like in the final game. But I'm not gonna lie, I know some people like these type of rooms, but as a level designer myself, I completely understand why they cut out this little section here, because you want to make panic events really simple as possible, because you know, it's a lot of information all at once. So if you're telling survivors to go through this side area, up a ladder, and then go straight, it's probably a lot easier for them to just tell them to, hey, just go that way, and then instead of telling them to go around. And also for the purpose of these rooms, I think there's just a really generic sort of rooms in this area, so I see it as trimming the fat. You don't really need it. So this interior section being cut makes sense, and sometimes you just gotta make these sort of cuts here and there, as the survivors gotta know where to go in these certain panic events. It's really important for clarity and level design. Keeping the level design simple is also one of Valve's strengths. That's obviously a big reason why I think this was cut out of the final game. And you'll notice Turtle Rock doesn't use as much of these dystopian set pieces that Valve tends to add later at this point. So the event resembles what you get in the final game, aside from these minor textures and model changes. I really miss the gas station as well. It's a shame this area did not make the final game, but I know a lot of people, this is their favorite area from the beta of Left 4 Dead, is being able to go in the gas station. That continuing in the level into the basement, you'll actually see some cut models like these sort of boiler generators that didn't make the final game. And it's also a lot more cramped, which I think would have made this area a little bit more intense in Versus, as there's more areas for Special Infected to spawn. Another example of Turtle Rock caring about the small details. The level also has multiple drops in the sewer, but the textures are actually completely different from the final game. And if you go in there, there's also a different color to the whole sewer system, where it's a lot more green and blue, probably looks a little bit more unrealistic. It's kind of unique and it gives it a different look. It shows a lot of what Turtle Rock's level design philosophy is on adding color in certain areas like this. Before entering the last leg of the sewer, there's actually going to be liftable doors that are not in the final game that actually got cut out. And also there was, the lovely ladder section that we all love because it's completely balanced. But if you make your way to the front of the No Mercy Hospital, you go through a different vibe on this iteration. The ladder is also a different model here. As you can see, No Mercy is in the background of this part of the level where it looks a little bit more of a smaller hospital at points. The linear skyscraper aspect of the hospital is still there, but it's next to another aspect of the building that is directly in front of the hospital. The end of the level is also the same, but you'll make it to map 4. And then entering the hospital, the survivors maneuver through a similar dynamic and level design. The level design here is pretty similar to what you'll get in the final game, besides some texture differences here and there, but I find it interesting that the blue prop barricade is actually missing near the panic event, and some of the models don't actually make it in the final game, but they obviously replace a lot of the breakable walls that are actually used in the panic event. They're not here yet, so this is probably something that was added later. And also the elevator feels a lot more dystopian, not as realistic. It's similar to probably what you would see in like Resident Evil or something. It doesn't look like a real hospital elevator. I do prefer the final version of this here. So also we get some different black textures that are used for some of the pillars, and you'll also get to see some older versions of the spool models before they got replaced. This level resembles what you mostly will see in the final game, but the next level actually has probably some of the most interesting changes in the whole campaign. Is if you make it to the top of the helipad, you'll have some of the more interesting aspects near this section of the level. It's probably one of the most well-known beginnings of a map, as it's actually completely absent and it would be completely changed as the balance of this level. One of the more interesting changes on this map is the ladder section that is near the beginning of map 5 is actually probably one of the most well-known aspects of this campaign because of how difficult it can be getting to the top of the rooftop. Well, actually these ladders were completely absent and they were changed to vents that you would just break through. And this was actually would have changed the balance of versus mode completely, as this was probably originally intended for them to sneak into these 2 vents and then enter into the finale area, so you wouldn't have to deal with death charges or anything like that in versus. So if you remember this section having a different design in this base version of Left 4 Dead 1, it actually resembles this iteration of the map and is probably a lot more difficult for the survivors because they ended up nerfing a lot of these aspects that were common for camping and also making the finale more open while allowing Special Infected to have more ambush points. So if you remember the layout of the Left 4 Dead 1 version way back in the day, there's going to be more obvious similarities to that version considering this is Left 4 Dead 1. Even the beta build, there's actually a lot of changes though on the rooftop. There's plenty of textures that are darker and they look a little bit more grungier before these redesigns, and there's multiple sections on the rooftop that are definitely changed up. And also the stairway near the radio is actually surrounded by walls. In the Left 4 Dead 2 version, they would obviously delete this element and nerf the spot for survivors. And there's also, of course, a ladder that is in Left 4 Dead 1 that leads to a high sniping point on the rooftop. This was also, cut out of Left 4 Dead 2. But in the beta version, this was probably even easier considering the left side has walls on it that are actually completely absent in the final version. And the camping spots from the main building actually have a little bit more of a different design, and there's plenty of examples of different models being placed throughout the levels. And yes, when you make it to the No Mercy chopper pilot near the end, once he finally arrives, you'll see the cut voice lines in action, and I think it's a really nice touch that Fairfield Terror actually did add this aspect to the game. And you also notice there's a ladder that leads up to the chopper that has a minigun on top. It's a really neat aspect that unfortunately didn't make it into the final game. Although the ladder does look kind of cheesy, I'm not gonna lie. I'm glad they got that cut. The ladder doesn't look good. Why did they cut something so beautiful? No, I'm kidding. In the game, it plays with its own ideas here as far as what this sort of cutscene would have been like with the survivors talking to the chopper pilot.
Now you understand why I told you to prepare? I swear those things can sense hope, and when they do, they have to destroy it. Saw you get hit. Are you immune? Hope I'm immune. I'm getting really cold.
So yeah, in the final game, when you enter the chopper, the level immediately ends, but they actually show the cut lines and action of the survivors talking to the No Mercy chopper pilot. It's probably seen as just another example of them trimming the fat. Although the aspect of him turning into a zombie is referenced in the final game, it just is obviously referenced in later campaigns like Crash Course. But that is No Mercy's beta. It is actually really interesting to see some of the differences, changes between what Turtle Rock was creating and also what was Valve creating. I think Turtle Rock had a lot of good aspects where they would create really detailed set pieces at certain points, like for example, but these aspects had to probably be cut to save on memory if I had to assume, because saving memory and trimming the fat in a lot of areas is really important because, you know, the Source engine is known to crash over literally anything. So keeping the levels trim while also conveying the correct information to survivors is definitely important. So that's why I think a lot of these areas did end up getting cut, but although it's kind of sad that none of them are probably ever going to see the light of day, of course. So, you know, they're not going to do a remix of No Mercy and add the clothing store. So it is interesting to see how Valve did build on these ideas and actually perfect a lot of these areas. I think a lot of people don't give Valve the credit that they really put into these early levels, as I think the lighting especially needed a lot of work, and then clearly Valve did go the extra mile on fixing that type of stuff. So you'll notice that No Mercy actually has a little more realistic lighting, and I'm pretty sure Valve was the one that wanted to make sure that type of stuff made it into the final game. If you guys liked the video, make sure to subscribe. You guys are the best. There's channel memberships down below if you guys want to support the channel, and there's a Discord down below as well. Take care, you guys. Have a good one.